So, the beginning of the end is finally here. A dark day for internet freedom. It's now over, and Articles 11 and 13 have passed in the EU Parliament. The internet as we know it is about to die. Lobbyists have tried in vain for years to bring about draconian copyright reform with SOPA, PIPA, and ACTA, but the internet successfully stopped them at every turn. But the forces of evil are nothing if not persistent, and they kept trying until they eventually pushed through immensely destructive new laws that will undermine free speech, online creativity, alternative news media, and even make many internet memes impossible. This is very, very bad news. And we're in serious trouble here. Julia Reda posted the following on Twitter: "Dark day for internet freedom. The European Parliament has rubber-stamped copyright reform, including Article 13 and Article 11. MEPs refused to even consider amendments. The result of the final vote: 348 in favour, 274 against. Years of campaigning to stop this has been for nothing. In the end, the EU got what it wanted: a means of controlling and censoring the web and the free passage of information, and no doubt, as a consequence, it also now has a means of scrubbing populist and nationalist movements from the internet. Corporate lobbyists in the mainstream media, as well as the film, television, music, and even video game industries, also got a big win today. Now, any content they own can be removed on their say-so, even if its usage in a particular work previously fell under fair use. I'm going to include an excerpt now from a previous video I made explaining just how destructive the EU copyright directive is going to be. The first thing to understand is that there are multiple vested interests involved here. I'll break them down to just three. Number one, commercial rights and IP copyright holders representing the film, television, and music industries. Number two, the mainstream news media corporations. And number three, the European Union. Number one, the film, television, and music industries have been unhappy with the internet since basically day one. They've utterly failed to clamp down on piracy. They can't stand the clips of their content, snippets of their music, and whole songs can be listened to on YouTube, or employed in remix videos, fair use, transformative capacities for commentary, satire, and review. The people in those industries who are lobbying for the EU copyright directive will be granted complete control over every image, video, and song they own. Article 13 of the copyright directive will allow them to detect any material that belongs to them when it's uploaded to a social network and instantly monetize it or remove it. Fair use be damned, regardless as to whether your use of that material is in a non-commercial capacity or not. Content ID matching will be everywhere. As you might imagine, the spreading of memes that make use of a copyrighted image will be impossible. Number two, the mainstream media. Similarly to the movie, music, and television industries, the mainstream media wants more of the pie at the expense of the little guy. They'll also be able to benefit from Article 13, but Article 11 will be their biggest coup. Article 13 is the database filter, which requires all social networks to filter every bit of content uploaded to them and cross-reference it with material that belongs to commercial rights holders. Article 11 is the link tax. If you're a small blog or alternative media commentator with your own website and you link to a news story from a major publication that you've used as a source, you'll have to pay a fee for that, and you won't be able to include snippets of text from other major publications in a fair use capacity either. A license will have to be agreed, and therefore only large companies will be able to pay for it. The mainstream media will therefore be able to save itself from its current death spiral by forcing other organizations to pay them in this way. As the mainstream media are heavily funded by large corporations, this will make small, up-and-coming, independent, alternative news media almost impossible. An attack on the hyperlink is obviously an attack on the very internet itself. All that will be left in news coverage will be the biased, globalist corporate media and their propaganda. Sounds fun. Even individual social media users posting links to articles on Facebook, Twitter, or any similar social network won't be able to do that without Facebook and Twitter having to agree to pay these link taxes. It's possible these social networks will agree to these fees, but it's more than likely that they will simply choose to cease operations in the EU entirely because the costs will become prohibitively expensive. Even small social networks like BitChute, Gab, and Minds will be faced with the same fees. So this isn't a case of the free market will come to the rescue and come up with a solution. The free market will be utterly compromised and unable to properly function, so new solutions will be extremely difficult to develop. Social media tech startups will be unable to grow because the startup costs created by the upload filter and link tax will be exorbitant. Furthermore, another reason that YouTube, Facebook, and others will likely have to greatly compromise or terminate their services in the EU is not just the potentially massive link tax fees, but because the Article 13 upload filter itself is completely impractical. The idea that they would have to devise some kind of sophisticated machine learning system, bot, or algorithm that could trawl through an infinitely large database of material and accurately detect what was original content and what belonged to a movie or music studio is just ridiculous, and the dizzying complexity of implementing such a system would be phenomenal, to say nothing about the costs. Finally, number 3, the European Union. This is the final beneficiary of the Copyright Directive, but for different reasons to the other two. The EU's justification is political. The EU itself is under threat. It no longer wishes for its citizens to be able to freely question its rulings, policies, and actions, and wishes to operate with complete autonomy. It's an anti-democratic, bureaucratic superstate that wishes to answer to no one and looks upon its citizens as a proletariat to be ruled and controlled. It knows that, for the most part, the predominantly left-wing mainstream media is pro-EU. It's the mostly Eurosceptic alternative media it wishes to censor. For example, it no longer wishes for people to be able to question the migrant crisis, which it created, so it introduces hate speech regulation. The problem is that hate speech legislation is difficult to apply and information is very difficult to police. This is because too many people have the ability to not only access information and alternative sources, but to spread them far and wide across the web. Information is power, and the EU knows it. The problem they face is that the hate speech argument is wearing thin. The Union faces legitimate criticism that it cannot deal with. It needs another means to control the news media narrative and restrict what its citizens can say and see online. So the EU Copyright Directive will allow the EU to censor the internet by destroying it, and it will do so not under the guise of combating hate speech and what it considers to be fake news, but via the smokescreen of copyright reform. 5 million users who protested this directive with petitions, as well as advice from leading internet and technology experts, academics, and activists, they were all ignored. When the EU sets its mind on doing something, it doesn't care what the proletariat has to say about it. Even the staunchest pro-EU supporter is going to have a hard time justifying their love for the Union after this catastrophe. For those of you outside of the EU, make no mistake. This directive is the future blueprint for the internet, and corporate lobbyists will seek to export it across the world, so be prepared. The internet in the EU is about to surpass China in terms of censorship, and that's saying something. Here's what UKIP's Gerard Batten had to say.
Against fair copyright and protecting the legitimate rights of authors, but this directive is about promoting the interests of multinational corporations and maximising their profits. It is also about controlling and shutting down free speech and dissent, not approved of by the media and political establishments. Dissenting voices are already being deplatformed and demonetised, and this will institutionalise censorship. UKIP MEPs and others forced a vote on this directive using the rules of procedures, otherwise it would have gone through on the nod last year. MPs should take note that the European elections will follow shortly. Voters should take note of who voted, which MEPs and which parties voted for this directive, and they should vote against them on the 23rd of May. The European Union and the political and media establishments want to suppress free speech and dissent. If MPs vote for this directive, then they deserve to lose their seats.
One thing is for sure, this is going to have serious economic consequences for tech startups and entrepreneurs. A lot of businesses are now going to find it impossible to obtain investment or continue their operations in the EU. And at a personal level, I have no idea how I'm going to continue my work. But I'm now seriously going to have to consider leaving Ireland. VPNs may be useful for a while, but I suspect that the EU will move to ban them, just like China did recently. As for how long it takes to implement the Copyright Directive, I'm not sure, but I'll say this. Today, we just watched free speech on the internet sentenced to digital oblivion by the EU, and most people are just busily going about their day, completely unaware as to what just occurred. Look out the window. Watch as oblivious people walk to and from work, sit in traffic, buy their groceries, collect their kids from school. The average normie is still asleep, and they have no clue what just happened today and what it's going to mean for the future. But one day, when they wake up and they're no longer able to do the things online that they once were, they're going to scratch their heads with confusion and wonder, what's going on here? What's happening? And then, when it's too late, they'll finally wake up from their slumber. It's just pathetic.